All right. So let's get this show going. Good morning once again. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast. a discussion on politics and culture. If you are joining me early, tuning in right now, I definitely want to thank you for giving me your time so early because it is early. What is the purpose of the Libertarian Party? Is it to run candidates? Is it to do activism? Maybe it's both. In today's episode, I discuss my personal thoughts on the matter and what drove this conversation. All right, we are back getting things kicked off here. So let's get some stuff up on the screen. There we go. Oh, that's not the right one. Goodness, that was yesterday's. Let's fix that really quickly, my little banner here, and get the right one. So there we go. All right. And there we are. Purpose of political parties. And I specified the LP in there. Let's get out some good mornings here and see what's going on out in the internet. All right. So, good morning, Hector. It is a good topic for sure. And good morning to you, Keith. So, let's see what is Hector saying already? When isn't a libertarian argued about the most basic goals of the LP? Time to grow up, guys. You know, it's funny. When aren't they? Well, you could have said 7 a.m. in the morning. They're not, but unfortunately, I got up and decided that is exactly what I would do. So here I am making that argument. Let's see what we got here. So I'm going to move some of my screens around so that we can get going here. All right. So the question of the question of purpose has been an argument, like Hector said, for quite some time. So what started me talking about this? Well, technically, I've actually been talking about this just kind of here and there for a very long time now, like every other libertarian. But let me show you some comments that came from Justin Amash. He is a former congressman out of Michigan. He was a Republican, and then I believe he switched to independent. And then in 2020, he did switch to, excuse me, he switched to the Libertarian Party and has been in the party since then. So here is what he said. All right, make that a little better. All right, so he said, I continue to get asked whether I intend to seek the Libertarian Party nomination for president in 2024. I've had a lot of time to think about this. The answer is no. I do not intend to run. If you had asked me this a question a couple of years ago, the answer would have been yes, absolutely. What changed? When I joined the LP, the party enjoyed widespread ballot access and seemed interested in expanding its reach. Today, not so much. I think my Zoom news is okay. To be clear, this has nothing to do with ideological differences. If anything, my policy views align more closely with those who describe themselves as right libertarians. It's about the proper role of a political party and the infrastructure of the party. Running for president is a massive undertaking, not one I'm willing to begin unless I believe I can run a competitive campaign that, if I can't win, substantially impacts the outcome. Right now, I don't believe the LP is positioned to support an effective presidential run. This is not an issue likely to be resolved in the short run. Simply put, I haven't been able to convince party leaders that they should focus almost exclusively on organizing libertarians to win elections. We just have a different philosophy about the role of parties. I think that libertarian activism should come from outside the party, and libertarian ideology should be driven primarily by libertarian individuals, including party members and the party's candidates for office, not the party itself. That's not to say the party shouldn't take ideological stances. It certainly will and must. But to be a successful political party, the LP will have to appeal to at least a third of the electorate. If it can't do that when the party itself is focused on being the ideological torchbearer for libertarianism. It instead needs to be a place that is welcoming to almost anyone who feels the Republicans and Democrats aren't libertarian enough. That's a low threshold. unsatisfying to those who believe the party must be the leading voice of libertarian activism. But if we want libertarians to compete in elections nationally, that is what it will take. Okay. So, first and foremost, I want to nitpick on one thing that Mr. Amash said. He said, and this was at the very, very beginning, I'm just going to reread it again. So, what he said was, um, if you had asked me this, talking about the presidential, running for presidential nomination, if you had asked me this question a couple of years ago, the answer would have been yes, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, um, we're gonna have to hold his feet to the fire a little bit here. And so, let me show you something. I want to nitpick because that's what we do as libertarians, but we're doing so fairly here. All right, and get this up on the screen. And there it is. Okay. Make that a little bit bigger so you can read it. So in April of 2020, Justin Amash switched to the Libertarian Party. And then he left Congress sometime thereafter. And then in May, there was conversation about whether or not Justin Amash would actually run. And in several tweets, he discusses his thoughts on this matter. And he said, after much reflection, I've concluded that circumstances don't lend themselves to my success as a candidate for president this year. And therefore, I will not be a candidate. Now, that was in 2020, the presidential, the last time that we had a presidential run. So I'm going to argue with him and say, Mr. Amash, no, actually, your comment that it would have a couple of years ago, because a couple of years ago we weren't running presidential candidates. So that is actually incorrect. So I'm going to nitpick on that one just a little bit, because I think it's important to, you are somebody who's talked about running for office. You have been in office, Mr. Amash. We do have to hold your feet to the fire a little bit. Okay, so moving on, I want to make a quick disclaimer. Actually, I want to make three. Very first one. Anybody that might be watching the show on a regular basis might remember today was supposed to be the day that Tub came on, and we were going to talk about cultural things. Um, he didn't. He did not. He is not here because I made the mistake and I kind of set up the show and started doing all my prep for it. And then he was like, "Hey, wait a minute, am I on the show?" So we had a conversation. We're going to bring him on next Friday, and then we're going to start having Tub on Friday. Now, Tub was one of the candidates that ran here in Jacksonville back last year. So he ran for a city council seat and at-large seat. So apologies for anybody that might remember that, but we will be bringing him on. The next two disclaimers. Number one, nothing that I say above my one criticism of Justin Amash is to be construed as an attack on anyone in specific or necessarily any group. And the reason I say this is throughout. So yesterday, what happened was I retweeted Justin Amash's his comments, and then I said I agree 100% with Justin Amash. Now, after thinking about it and reading it, I realized, you know what, I kind of don't agree 100% because you declined the last time for the presidential nomination. So I made that point just really quickly, but beyond that, I am not attacking anybody in particular. So if you see anything that, if you hear anything, it's not an attack on anybody. And it's not an attack on any particular group. The reason is because in that conversation on between Facebook and on Twitter, there was a lot of conversation. And at one point, somebody kind of went into and said, well, Justin Amash he's basically saying this. And I said, no, I don't think he's saying that at all. I think you need to be very careful about what we read into words. So anything that I say here should be at face value. My words mean what I say, nothing more. If there's a question, feel free to ask. I will answer it. Second, I am not a lawyer or a parliamentarian. I'm just a reader. We're going to have a little bit more on that in a moment. Okay. But I want to let people just remember I'm just a regular guy. I'm reading stuff. I interpret it based on my reading. That's it. All right. So, what is the purpose generically? Let's start there. Generically, the purpose of the political party, we can look at the FEC. So let's start there. And here we are. Let's zoom in a little bit. It says, this is from the FEC, fec.gov. Federal campaign finance law defines political party as a committee or organization whose nominated or selected candidates for federal office appear on the ballot as the party's candidates. However, ballot access is governed by state law. We don't have to have a conversation about ballot access. All right. So that's the first thing. We're talking generically here right now. Okay. Um, Second up, Florida statutes. So let's take a look at the Florida statutes. Florida statutes also, now, by the way, if you look up in Florida, because I live in Florida, you will find that Florida, the state of Florida has views the Libertarian Party here in Florida as a minor political party. So here in the Florida statute, chapter 103.095, minor political parties, any group of citizens organized for the general purposes of electing to office qualified persons and determining public issues under the democratic process of the United States may become a minor political party of this state. And then they go on to describe the process and so on and so forth. So, right off the bat, generically speaking, a political party is to engage in the political process. Now, you might say, but DL, we're libertarians. How are we going to let the government define who we are? Well, we chose this. We operate under that umbrella. We literally go and say, we would like to be a political party. We follow all the processes that they require of us. For instance, and I don't have the information to show you, but as a chair here in Duval, if I do not turn in my reports, my financial, if me and the treasurer do not submit our, because we both have to give a PIN number, if we do not submit our quarterly reports, we could be fined $500. I and the treasurer both have a legal fiduciary duty to do certain things. So we are already operating. This is not me deferring to the government because I think the government is right. This is me deferring to the government because we literally have chosen to start an organization under the definition of what the government says and follow the rules and regulations that they have prescribed. So it doesn't matter whether we like the government or not, we are engaging in that. So generically speaking, I think that we have already placed ourselves as a as a party that engages in the political process, that run candidates, and as the Florida statute actually nicely points out, determining public issues under the democratic process. Doesn't matter whether you like it or not. Again, that's what we're doing. There's also what you might call a social definition. Okay. Now, think about it this way. How many times have you, as a libertarian, been out talking to people and you said, hey, yeah, I'm from the Libertarian Party, and maybe you're supporting a candidate, or maybe you want them to support, you're having some conversation regarding the Libertarian Party, whether it's a candidate or an issue. How many times have you heard something like this? Oh, yeah, yeah. I like the libertarians. I can't support them right now. Right. Right. And I've heard that so many times. I remember going to a gun show back like what, 2, 3 years ago. And it was huge. It was more than 2 days ago. It was before anyway. So I remember it was before one of the elections. I can't remember if it was the most recent one or the one before. But I went to a gun show and it was huge Trump crowd. And we were, showing people that, hey, we as a party really support gun rights, like way beyond any other party. And people, when I talk to people, they would say that. They would say, oh, yeah, yeah, I'm libertarian, but not this election. I got to vote for Trump. I got to vote for Trump. Like they said, so they understood when we're talking to people. If not, now a lot of people don't know what the Libertarian Party is. And whenever we describe it, we almost always describe it as a political party that engages in the political process. But for the people that are familiar with it, even just a little bit, those people in their mind understand that we run candidates, that we engage in the political process, right? So there's this social definition. Now, we could change that if we want, but here's a thought: we don't have the social or the political capital to really change that definition. We could change it for us, right? We could say, well, we don't believe that's what we are. We have, we're this kind of an entity, right? Um, and maybe we could be successful since there's quite a few people that don't know who we are. So we might even be successful on some level of changing that definition. But then what happens later if we gain some momentum and we really want to be a political organization, a more political organization later? then we start having problems. So in my mind, we have the legal definition that we're already engaging in. We've already kind of accepted by virtue of standing up an organization and following the rules and regulations that are required of us, versus any other kind of organization. And we have the social definition for which people know us by. And many parties will go to places and they will say, hey, we're the Libertarian Party of, and it'll maybe be a state party or it'll maybe be a local party. And in some cases, it'll be even the national party. We're the National Libertarian Party. So we identify ourselves as a political party when we're out and about. And we often, as a party, promote our candidates. We do promote our causes too, and we will get to that. Okay. Now, it was asked of me on Twitter if this violates our bylaws, our national bylaws. And that's a perfect question to ask because part of the debate has been about what do our bylaws say. So let's take a look at the bylaws here. So we're going to pull that up and see what they say. Now I've just got a clip of it. I don't have the whole thing because this tends to be where people point to. They say, "Hey, Article 2," because it literally says purposes. Kind of helps out. So the question is now, the generic definition that I've given, does that generic definition fit with what the bylaws say? I believe so. So we're looking at this, and let me zoom in just a wee bit just to make it a little bit bigger. There we go. How about that? All right. So it says the party is organized to implement and give voice to the principles embodied in the statement of principles by number one, functioning as a libertarian political entity, separate and distinct from all other political parties or movements. Number two, electing libertarians to public office to move public policy in a libertarian direction. Number three, chartering affiliate parties throughout the United States and promoting their growth and activities. Number four, nominating candidates for president and vice president of the United States and supporting party and affiliate party candidates for political office. And number five, entering into public information activities. So, what I pointed out online, I said, to me, the first four items are about politics. Now, you could argue that number one is a little bit more ambiguous. It says function as a libertarian political entity, separate and distinct from all other political parties or movements. Okay. And so there is a little bit of ambiguity there. I look at that and I say, since we are referencing political parties, and we do reference movements, we are to some extent identifying as at least in part a political party. But again, I also refer back to how we organize the entire organization, which is to follow the rules of the FAC. Number two, electing libertarians to public office to move public policy in a libertarian direction. So number two is clearly about politics and policy. Number three, chartering affiliate parties throughout the United States and promoting their growth and activities. Well, as I just pointed out, the state of Florida defines the Libertarian Party of Florida as a minor political party, and they define that as any group of citizens organized for the general purposes of electing to office qualified persons and determining public issues under the democratic process. Okay, so the state of Florida recognizes the state of Florida recognizes the Libertarian Party here in Florida as a political party. So when we say we're going to charter affiliate parties throughout the United States, it doesn't make sense to say, well, we're gonna make you something other than a political party whose purpose is to engage in the political process, despite the fact that the United States, which we follow, we accept the rules and we observe their governance. Um, they define us as a political party for that purpose. The states define the state affiliates as a political party for that very purpose. Okay. And then number four, very clear again, I believe, nominating candidates for president and vice president of the United States and supporting party and affiliate party candidates or political office. And then number five, entering into public information activities. Now, number five is the most, in my opinion, that is the most vague of them all, but it's kind of clear to me when I read this that it does include activism. Okay. So let me remember in one of my previous episodes where I was talking and I said, look, I think there are three different roles that people play in the liberty movement. Number one, you can be an activist. And this is not in any particular order, but number one, you can be an activist. Number two, you can be a party, you can be a party officer. And number three, you can be a candidate running for public office. Now, I went a little bit further and I pointed out that you can actually be a primary. In other words, you are actually one of those um, entities, if you will, or one of what one of those roles. You play one of those roles, or you are a supportive role. So maybe you're not a maybe you're not an officer in the party, but you do things to help out the officers, right? You help organize. Maybe you're the person who says, "I will manage your social media, the party's social media." Okay, that's not necessarily a specified. I mean, it is in some sense, but it's not specified necessarily in the laws, right? Like it's kind of like this supportive role because technically we don't have to have a social media account. I mean, we should obviously, right? So this to me is effectively playing the party role. So again, you're a party. You're playing the role in the party. You're playing the role as a candidate or support or an activist, and you can be directly or indirectly in any one of those three. Um, so I think that public information activities are very much within the scope of activism. Now, what constitutes activism? For me, and there's no clear definition. For me, activism, this podcast is a form of activism. I'm getting out there, I'm putting my face, my voice out there publicly talking about different topics, pointing people toward ideas, pointing people toward the party. So I am doing activism. Other activism could be going out and protesting, right? It's not my favorite. I don't particularly like protesting, but that is a form of activism. Okay. So all these things can be active. Writing books, that's a form of activism. Anytime that you bringing attention to the party or the party's ideas, you are engaging in some level of activism. Some of it's a little bit more, like you might consider it a sliding scale and say that, well, some forms of activism are clearly like that is activism. Like if somebody goes and does something and gets arrested, and then that causes a conversation about something that was clearly well within the boundaries of activism. But if somebody writes a book, we might not think about it as activism necessarily. It's like, well, you just wrote a book. Okay. But what they did was they brought attention to an idea or potentially a party. So it's basically action. So for me, I don't believe that Justin's comments as written violate the bylaws. I think they're well within the bylaws. And I also point out something else. If you look at the national bylaws, Article 14 is titled Presidential and Vice Presidential Campaigns. And then Rule number 7 is titled Nomination of Presidential and Vice Presidential Candidates. In other words, there are sections devoted to that detail the process for nominating the president and the vice president. But what we don't have that I didn't see, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I missed it, I don't see anything that specifies any dedicated sections to public information activities. So when I look at the bylaws, I see a whole lot more effort put toward the fact that we are operating as a political entity or a political party as understood by the government and by our everyday people. Right. So for me, I don't feel like he's in violation there. Now, there's some interesting things came up in that conversation on Twitter. There was some people, that were like, "Hey, what about?" I'm trying to think of how to say this. Uh, there was some concern about history, about why those things were there. So when I read a document at face value first, first and foremost, the plain reading of any document. If I have questions, then I have to seek out other resources. For me, I believe that of all things, the organization's purpose should not have to send somebody anywhere else to understand the purpose. That should absolutely be clear. If there's anything in the bylaws that should be 100% crystal clear, it should be the purpose. No ambiguity. So if I have to go somewhere else, then that represents a different problem that needs to be addressed. So, where did I get this kind of idea? Well, in 2005, Antonin Scalia, the former justice, he has since passed away, he gave a speech called Constitutional Interpretation the Old Fashioned Way. So let me pull up that. Just going to read a little clip. We're just going to see a little clip of that here. So we're not going to read the whole thing. It's like it translates to about 7 pages, but we're not going to go through all that. I just want to. There's a particularly relevant portion that I think is of value here that adds to this conversation. So, what he's doing in this conversation, he's talking about constitutional interpretation and he's disputing this idea of a living constitution. A living constitution is basically where people say, you know what, I think it means this. You get a good example of this when people say, well, the Second Amendment, what is a militia? And people start trying to define a militia today. And we all argue and say, no, no, a militia as understood back then, meant something, meant the people. And so we have this big debate. But the reason that we have this debate on the Second Amendment, where people try to claim that you don't have that right or it's in some way changed, is because of this idea of a living constitution. So he says, what are the arguments usually made in favor of a living constitution? As the name of it suggests, it's a very attractive philosophy. It's hard to talk people out of it. The notion that the Constitution grows. The major argument is the Constitution is a living organism. It has to grow with the society that it governs, or it will become brittle and snap. This is the equivalent of an anthropomorphic, of anthropomorphism. I think I said that right. Equivalent to what you hear from your stockbroker when he tells you that the stock market is resting for an assault on the 11,000 level. The stock market panting at some base camp. The stock market is not a mountain climber, and the Constitution is not a living organism, for Pete's sake. It's a legal document. And like all legal documents, it says some things and it doesn't say other things. If you think the aficionados of the living constitution want to bring you flexibility, think again. So the point that I really want to focus in on is that it says some things and it doesn't say other things. When I read a document, any document, especially one that is prescribing rigidity, I'm looking for what does it say and what does it not say. Now, if there is some ambiguity, again, going back to the Second Amendment argument, then sometimes you do need to go back and you need to look at history. But the what should always be clear. The how, the why, now that may be something that you need some history on, but the what should absolutely be clear. And what is our purpose should be 100% clear. So if anybody believes that there's ambiguity in our bylaws, which effectively is a legal document for us, then that needs to be corrected. But for me, I don't believe that it's nearly as ambiguous. I mean, there's a little bit, but I don't think it's so much that it deters from the reality that we are a political party that runs candidates, that engages in the political process. Now, some questions. Does this interpretation leave room for activism? Absolutely. So let's define activism. And I don't have a formal definition, but I say that I say, what's the purpose actually? But better yet, let's do what's the purpose? What's the purpose of activism? What does it do? Do we just out there making noise? Sometimes it feels that way. Sometimes I feel like, and I don't mean just libertarian. I mean just mean when I see activism in general, when I see the stop oil people out there doing all kind of crazy things, sometimes I think they just want attention. So the purpose of activism, for me, in my mind, is that it should do two things. It should open the door for a candidate to speak or promote an idea, or it should open the door for a conversation about the party or ideas when there is no particular individual available, like a candidate or somebody like that. But above all, for the Libertarian Party, activism should serve to point toward liberty. So a candidate should be able to grab onto it and utilize the activism, or it should open the door for a conversation about our party or ideas. So let's talk about a couple examples. Our national party, they recently had the Rage Against War. That is a form of activism. And that introduced, that opened the door for a conversation about our anti-war position. And it gave us an opportunity to get out and maybe get a little bit of attention and then also produce some content. These are things that I think are very appropriate. Some people disagreed with it, but the conservatorship for Biden, that was a form of activism. It was a way to get out there and make some noise. And then I believe, I don't know for sure, but I believe that it was structured in a way so that it could make noise, get attention, but at the same time, if by some chance that it actually were to go through, we could follow through with it, which I think is a good form of activism. A good form of activism. If there is something that needs follow through, then I would say that a good form of activism make sure that it's structured in a way that follow through can happen. We don't want to just, you don't want to go out there and be like, hey, we're ready to do this thing. And then if somebody gives you an opportunity, then you're ill prepared for it, right? We have to be careful of that. The last LNC, the anti mandate ad, that was a form of activism. You were going out and you were bringing attention to a party's position, right? Our position was the government should not be imposing mandates upon the people. At the state level, the LPF and the Green Party, a few years back, they got together and they formed a small campaign to push back against a state amendment that was on the ballot. Okay, that is a form of activism, and it leads to liberty, as I point out. Now, another question: does this mean that we water down our principles? No, absolutely not. Now, I do have I take issue with this. I think there is I think it's rampant, and I think there is a false dichotomy of principles or libertarian light. Like people like the moment you suggest that people might say something different, they're like, no, no, I'm standing on my principles. And I think, well, this is where I get a little critical. We're going to start down the critical path, but not any particular person, because I think it's widespread, and I think there's a lot of people that need to reevaluate. So so when I say that there's a false dichotomy, I think that two things apply here when we're talking about how we present the message. Number one is sometimes you might have to choose when to speak and when not to speak. So let me give you an example of when it might be unwise to speak. So locally here, now I'm the chair of the local affiliate here in Duval. Um, our police have been in the news several times. We've had some shootings that have made national attention and so on and so forth. So, a more recent one, and I'm not going to show the picture, a man was arrested and a picture popped up and went around social media. And he literally looks like he got in a fight with Rocky Balboa. I mean, it looks bad. I mean, it is awful. Okay. And so, then video appeared of this man's arrest. So here's what happened. You had some undercover officers that were at a gas station. They see a man pull up in a truck. He's not really getting gas. And then another man pulls up in a different vehicle, goes, hops in. They make an exchange of money. The undercover alerts his peers. They end up following the truck. They pull it over, and they're getting out, and they're going to go and check out what's going on, because they're like, hey, we're pretty sure for these reasons that this was a drug deal and that these guys had this and that and whatever. So what ended up happening is one of the men, the passenger, he got out and just bolted, started running. The officer, and we have the body cam, we can watch it. The officer chases after him, says, you effed up now. And then ends up saying, hey, stop, or I'm going to tase you. He tases the man one time. The man doesn't stop. He tases him a second time. The man falls on his face. Then there's video from a private citizen that popped up that showed the actual arrest where they're handcuffing him and all this other stuff. So there's like a bit of a gap between in events that happened between the time that he landed he basically face planted from being tased, and then from the time that the citizen starts their video, or at least the one that I saw. And it doesn't look like he's resisting a whole lot, and it doesn't look like that JSO has really engaged in a lot of aggressive behavior. Some a little bit, but I didn't think it wasn't as clear as, like, say, the Rodney King video. Okay, that one was that was absolutely crystal clear. So you might be like, okay, well, the Libertarian Party, we oppose the drug war, we oppose police brutality. What makes it difficult is that the man in question has a long string of violent history. Okay, that means that we have to, as a party here locally, determine, is this something that we want to engage in on this particular instance, or maybe this is an area where we don't say a whole lot. The reason for that is a really good reason. It's not because we're watering down our principles. It's because you have to pick your battles properly. And the problem is, and I know this going in, that the moment we say something, all the people are going to say, oh, they support a violent criminal. They're not going to, nobody's going to want to talk about, like, we're not going to move the needle on talking about what we want to talk about because we don't have that capital yet. So we have to be more mindful about what we speak. The second thing is you might have to change your delivery style. Okay. This one is actually the one that I get the most pushback. And it's kind of wild that I get the push because when I tell people you need to change your delivery style, there are somewhere between 400,000 and 600,000 words that are relatively common in the English language. All I'm saying is find different ones to put together in a sentence to communicate an idea, the ones that need to be put together in that order so that people will be convinced, right? Like deliver, change how you talk about it, not what you talk about. So I have an example of that. I'm going to pull that up. We're going to watch this quick video where I did somewhat that. We're talking about taxation now. So here, let me lay it down what's going on. This is several years ago. The city of Jacksonville was getting ready to impose a an additional gas tax on Jacksonville, and so they were having town halls where the citizens could come in and discuss it. So I went in, and this was right around the time where I was having this very conversation about changing how you talk about things, but not necessarily what you talk about. So what I challenged myself to do is I said, all right, I'm going to see if I can go in and make a public comment in front of everybody and say taxation is theft and not look like a crazy person. That's all I wanted to do, you know? So here, let me pull up that clip and let's see if I accomplished that. 'Cause I think I did.
Thank you. My name is DL Cummings. I live over on the south side over in the Secret Cove area,
Don't come try to find
and
me.
I'm the chair of the Libertarian Party here in Duval. If anybody knows anything about the members of our party, you know that we're highly averse to all taxes. We even have a clever slogan, taxation is theft. However, rather than come here to chant about clever slogans, I'd like to ask a serious question, and I'm not really sure who specifically to direct this to. But we are currently, as I understand this issue, at a 6 cents tax on that we're being asked to accept an additional 6 cents as well that will last 30 years. And then if I understand it correctly, extend the current one for another 10 years. Fuel efficiency advancements seem to be already outpacing tax's ability to fund infrastructure. So my question is, what evidence do you have that fuel efficiency advancements and the demand for electric and hybrid cars will not place a future Jacksonville in a place or a position to need additional taxes to complete these infrastructure projects?
That's a really very good question, and Jordan's been talking about that, so I'm going to give that one to you.
All right. So that's how I did it. I managed to say taxation is theft without looking like a crazy person. Now you might say, well, DL, that's just your opinion. You just felt that way. No, I actually have evidence because here's what happened. As I was leaving, two women approached me and they said, excuse me. They said, what organization did you say you were from? And I said, I'm from the Libertarian Party. I'm the chair. I said, it's the third largest party in the United States, third largest political party in the United States. And they said, oh, wow. Okay. And they were like, what did you say about the taxation and theft? What? So I gave him my rundown. I said, all right, there's three of us here. I said, let's say that we go to vote on taxes. And I said, two of you two decide that you want to vote on taxes, but I decide that I want to vote against it. And I said, well, because there's two of you and there's only one of me, you win. And I said, however, I didn't want to pay the taxes, which means it's taken from me, even though I didn't want it. I said, so unless there's 100% buy-in, it's always theft to someone. Oh, right. Now, are they libertarians? No. But again, the goal was to go in and talk about our principles in a way that would engage people. I did it. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. When we need to change our delivery style, we need to focus on how we communicate. It bothers the piss out of me. Sorry for that language, but it bothers the piss out of me when I see libertarian after libertarian showing us, oh, look at this, look at this philosophy book. Look at this. I got all these, and they've read like 10, 20 philosophy books. And I'm like, where are the books on communication? How do you get those ideas to people, everyday people? Because for me, one of the questions that I answered somebody online yesterday, they, they were pointing out like, you know, okay, well, we need ideological adherence. We need people to come around to libertarian. I said, no, we don't. Not as a political party. What we need are people to vote for us. That's it, right? Like, I don't need everybody in the city of Jacksonville to become a libertarian. I need them to vote for our candidates. Then our candidates can get into office and do their thing. Okay. We had a candidate run. He ran in a two-way race, him against an establishment Republican. His name is Eric Parker. He got like 35% of the vote. 56,000 people voted for him for here in Jacksonville. Now, do you think that at what point do you think we're going to get 56,000 people here in Jacksonville to come around to our ideas? Well, I can tell you this. They voted for him a hell of a lot sooner than they came around to our ideas because they're not libertarians. We literally have about 2,000 registered libertarians in here in Jackson. Might be about 2,500. So we have about 2,500 registered libertarians here in Jacksonville. Now, some people might say, push back and say, well, wait a minute. What happened after that? Are they, did maybe they just protest voted? You're right. Some of them did. That's okay. I will take a protest vote. Here's why. Because protest votes go both ways. It wasn't that. So in Eric's case, there's a man here in Jacksonville that I know personally. He's a Democrat. He actually ran for office. We brought him in to speak because he ran for office. We brought him in to speak to our party. We developed a bit of a relationship with him. At one point, we were confident that he was going to vote for some of our candidates. Come election time, I saw him post a picture of Eric's opponent's sign. And I was like, dude, I thought you were going to vote for our candidates. And he said, he's a Democrat voting for an establishment Republican. And he's told me, he said, well, I don't think that Eric would uphold this thing that we've got going on in our city. So therefore, I'm voting for a guy I know will. And I was very incensed because I was like, dude, you didn't even ask him. Like you're just guessing. So even though he was a Democrat, he voted for a Republican over a libertarian. So it goes both ways. But in the political process, what I'm looking for, what our candidates are looking for are votes. Because to be honest with you, most of the people, once the voting is done, they're not nearly as involved. You get your activist after that. So the majority of the population, they're barely ideologically aligned anywhere where they're doing anything in between elections. So that to me, that's a pointless effort to go for. Now, let's talk about some real life examples here. I'm going to move on to some other real life examples of some things, but I want to point out something in an essay called Freedom of Opportunity, Not Equality of Opportunity by American economist, George, I think it's Reisman. He writes this, and I'm not going to pull it up on the screen, so you're just going to have to listen. Quote, an opportunity is merely an occasion on which successful action is possible. It is a situation that an individual can take advantage of to his gain. What needs to be realized about opportunities is, first of all, that there is no scarcity of them. They arise again and again. So this is how I see activists in our party. And this is why I believe that they are absolutely as critical as our candidates, as our party leaders, our party, people that engage in the party process. Excuse me, folks. Might have to hit that mute button. They are the ones that create these kind of opportunities again and again and again. But there is a fundamental problem. There's two of them. The first one is that people tend to be ill prepared to discuss our positions to average everyday people, or to borrow from Reisman here a little bit, we fail to seize the opportunity when a successful action is possible. So let's talk about some examples. Here's an example using our own party where I think they were engaging in kind of extreme activism. Okay. So let's put this up on the screen. This comes from, well, I'm going to put up my words and I'll have to describe to you because it looks like the tweet there is gone. But we're talking about New Hampshire now. New Hampshire loves to tweet out stuff. They're wild and crazy. Okay. So on this particular instance, they tweeted out, and again, I don't have it. I apologize. It looks like they deleted the tweet maybe, but they tweeted out something about child labor laws, like abolishing all child labor laws. And so when I talk about being ill prepared to seize upon these opportunities, one of the things that I pointed out a long time ago to people, I said, look, I think one of the big problems that we have in our party is that people are very good at talking to other people when it's an idea they necessarily agree with, but not so much when it's an idea that they necessarily disagree with or the delivery that they disagree with. So in this particular case, I again found a way to talk about child labor. And I said, food for thought. Minors under 14 in Illinois are limited when it comes to work. Adam Toledo, the young man recently shot by Chicago police, was 13 years old and out and about on the streets at 2:30 a.m. with a 21-year-old man. Child labor laws have taken a competing incentive for at-risk teens. So in this particular case, the case that I'm making here, I'm taking a very radical tweet that stirred things up. And I said, all right, let's redirect this back to a place where I can have a conversation. So I did. And I said, 13-year-old boy killed by the police. Here's the story. He was out and about when he should have been home probably, or well, no, not probably. It's 2:30 in the morning. He should have been home sleeping, but he was out and about. And Chicago apparently has some sort of system where they can recognize gunshots and alert the police. So the police were alerted. They came out. They came across this man and this boy. They gave chase. I think the man went one way, the boy went another way, down an alleyway, and officers chasing him. They come to they come to a certain point where the boy is kind of up against a fence, and the officer, and this all happens in like a split second. The officer's like, drop your weapon, and I think the boy, or he said turn around or something like that. And then the boy, and you can see it, it's very fast, but you can see he tosses a gun behind the fence. But in that moment, because he made such a quick movement, the officer shot him dead. Okay. So I looked at it and I said, child labor laws in Illinois are very restrictive under the age of 14. They're relatively restrictive for 14 and 15-year-olds, and they start lightening up as you get older. So if we didn't have child labor laws, then you might have had an opportunity for this young man that would have competed with what he was up to. Because the fact of the matter is, I don't know his home life, but whatever he was doing in his mind was deemed more important than being somewhere else where he would not have ended up being shot, say work, right? And I remember this growing up. I remember friends, I would say like, hey man, you want to go out tonight? Nah, I got to work. Right? Work is, whether we want to admit it or not, and we should, work is a competing incentive. And there's no reason that for a kid who may be at risk, that they don't have every opportunity available to keep them out of trouble, to keep them on the straight and narrow, and to keep them from dying. So I did all of that. I did all of that with this one tweet. Like I just literally talked about a very relevant current story, right? Because I was prepared to talk about it. Talk about another one. This one's even worse in my mind. So the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, they tweeted out to abolish the Civil Rights Act. Man, that really got things going up. And I just wanted to see, could I have a conversation? So I have a buddy named Steve. I talk about him every now and then. Steve comes over to my house all the time, and he actually was on my podcast a long time ago. And so we were out having a cigar, and I just wanted to see about this, tweet, and just see kind of like how his reaction was. And so I want you to watch this. And actually, for the purposes of the show and activism, I want you to hear what he has to say. Now, Steve is more of a progressive kind of guy. Him and I argue like crazy when it comes to foreign policy. I cannot get that man to budge. It's awful. But he's a good guy, but his position on that is awful. So let's pull that up and let's watch and see what he has to say real quick.
In any conversation like the ones that we have, like some ideas are radical.
Right.
Right. But I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with a radical idea. Radical ideas made this country great. Like, we're going to go to the moon.
Right.
That's a radical idea. We're going to try democracy on for size. That's a radical idea. Right. We're going to try and do this thing in the world because of what we believe in. That's a radical idea. I'm not saying all those ideas were right. I'm not even saying that all those ideas had the results that we expected when they started. but they were radical ideas. And I
Right.
think that radical ideas today or tomorrow need to be examined and sometimes tried on some sort of scale. I think that radical ideas, the ideas that come across as radical, that I disagree with the most are the ones that I feel like we already tried.
Okay.
I think those are the ones that challenge me the most to examine my own perspective
Right.
and to try and articulate that perspective to other people.
Okay. But here's what was said. One line. Repeal the Civil Rights Act.
Um, okay, so I guess
Go all out or not,
I was gonna
right?
say,
Right.
yeah, I mean, so I
Is that radical or extreme?
it's radical.
Okay, fair enough.
It's pretty radical.
Interesting. So my friend, who is not a libertarian, is not even a conservative, he's a more progressive kind of guy. He deemed that comment as radical versus extreme. And then, as you heard, he actually talks up the idea of having radical ideas. So I think that radical ideas have a value. I think that activism that presents and promotes radical ideas has value. This is why I say from the very beginning, from the very outset, that activists absolutely belong in the party, not just the movement, but the party. We need them, especially since we're the underdog, right? The Republican Party and the Democrat Party, they don't really need activists so much. We do. We have to have them. We also have to have people that are ready to capitalize on the things that they do. That is, and we'll go back really quickly to that George Reisman quote, an opportunity is merely an occasion on which successful action is possible. We need people that are prepared to capitalize on that and make an action on make an action on their actions successful. Now, really quickly here, activist, you're not off the hook, okay? Your biggest value is providing those opportunities for successful action. But if your actions far exceed what your peers are prepared to utilize, to work with, then it's time to tame some of your actions. Because otherwise, they're just going out into the ether. They're not accomplishing anything. So to wrap this up, because I know we're going a little bit long here. I usually try to end this by 8 o'clock, and I got a little late start, so I apologize. I believe that yes, the purpose of the political party is to engage in the political process. Yes, it does include activists. We already know that it includes the candidates and the party officers. That's kind of a given. I believe that there are multiple avenues for which we can look and we can see that, yes, a political party's purpose is to engage in the political process. I get it. A lot of you out there that may be watching, maybe you're an anarchist. Maybe you don't like government. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I have no issues. I'm not. I'm a minarchist. For people that are watching that may not know these terms, a minarchist is basically little government. Anarchist is basically no government. Okay. Gets a little bit more in depth than that, but that is a simple definition to work with for this particular moment. I think that we're all valuable in this particular process because we are an underdog. And so we have to learn how to work together. The activists have to keep giving us opportunities that we can act successfully on. We, being the candidates and the party officers, have to learn how to utilize them, redirect the conversation if necessary, say things that seem crazy to other people, and figure out how to say them in a way where it actually brings about question, makes people want to inquire further, just like the two women did at the town hall when they approached me and said, "Hey, what was it that you said about taxes and theft?" And then I got an opportunity to explain to them in literally 2 minutes. Now, are they libertarians? No. But now they've heard what taxation is theft really means. And it took only 2 minutes. And I did it by saying something kind of radical in the context of asking a very deliberate question, which, by the way, his response was garbage. He basically said, "We got to get now while the getting's good." Whatever. At any rate, and then activists, your job is to kind of be mindful, read the room. Everybody needs to read the room. Activist, you're no different. You need to read the room as well. And if you're not reading the room and saying, hey, you know what? My peers aren't ready for this level, dial it down. And if you don't dial it down, then you're just harming you're harming the movement. You're harming the organization. And then lastly, just to reiterate, I don't believe that our bylaws are in any way conflicting, because everything that I read points toward we are a political party that does political party things as is defined and accepted by us, but as is defined by the government, both the federal government and the state government, and then as accepted by us by virtue of following all the regulations. There you go, folks. I hope I successfully convinced you that the purpose of the political party is to run candidates, but it is more than that. And I hope that all of my arguments made absolute sense. And if you have some questions, I would love to take some questions from the audience today, but I am running out of time and I do need to get going because my W-2 wants me. So I got to make sure that I get going. I got a late start. I apologize for that. I was just trying to wrap up some things. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I want you to catch me every Monday morning. I say it every time. I got to rewrite that script. Every morning, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion. Yes, I did miss one yesterday. Honestly, I'm just going to be straightforward. I wasn't prepared, so I figured I'd not waste your time. Also on Sundays at 7 p.m. with my co-host, Susan Hogarth, we're going to discuss LP happenings. We go out on the internet and we look all across and we try to find what is going on in other LPs and then present that so that you can be motivated and excited about what's happening in the Libertarian Party, whether it's in your party or somewhere else. And then if you see a good idea that you want to utilize, bam, there you go. Now we've helped you out. So be sure to do all the proper audience actions. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Drop a comment. I do try to read all the comments. And again, you can catch me. Let's see, where is it here? There we are. All right, you can catch me. youtube.libertydad.com, rumble.libertydad.com. Right now, Rumble is a little bit on the light side, meaning I only have one video up. I am still in the process of trying to set it up. It's a difficult thing to be a one-man band here. So I'm doing my best. But if you'll go on there, and at least if you're a Rumble user, at least give me a follow there or give me a follow on YouTube or both. That would be fabulous, especially on Rumble, because I need I think I have like 1 or 2 followers now. If you get me to 20, I think I get my own name, so I don't have a string of letters and numbers. Anyway, that's all that I got for you folks. You know, where are we here? I was looking for something. Lost my train of thought there. Sorry about that. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people. Your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time.